how's it going? It's Laura. Welcome to my 5th summer young adult book review video. The next book I'm going to be reviewing is a book called Nothing by Janae or Jenny Teller. This is a book that I'm feeling a little conflicted about. It's the first book I'm reviewing that I'm not going to be giving an overwhelmingly positive review. I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 stars. It raises a lot of really interesting philosophical kind of existential questions, but I had issues with the writing style, and I was also deeply disturbed by the book. And I know that on a certain level it is supposed to be disturbing, but I do think that you could run into issues if you were using sections of this in your class, or if you were recommending it as independent reading to your students. So just like my other review videos, I'm going to talk a little bit about the plot. With a book like this, I think it is really important to know kind of the subject matter because, as I said, I was kind of unsettled by this book, and I think students probably would be as well. I'll talk a little bit about things you could use this book to teach, excerpts primarily. I don't think this book would be useful in its entirety. And then at the end I'll discuss what in my opinion would be the small set of students that this book would appeal to. So, Nothing. The premise of this book is really interesting, and as I mentioned in my last review video, I knew that it dealt with some really deep philosophical kind of existential questions, and I was really intrigued to see how these kinds of questions would be dealt with in the young adult genre. So on a basic level, the premise is really intriguing. It's about a class of 7th graders at a kind of suburban middle school in Denmark. And on the first day of school, one of these 7th graders, Pierre, comes in and just declares to the class, nothing matters, and walks out of school. And then he proceeds to climb a plum tree in front of his house, and he doesn't come down. And this act really unsettles his classmates. I think because fundamentally him saying nothing matters really on a deep level challenges their just emerging sense of self and identity and purpose and meaning in the world. So they decide they have to do something about this. And at first they just decide to go to the tree and harass Pierre. They throw stones at him. This method is not particularly effective either in driving him out of the tree or in making him stop all these statements he's making that are really challenging their sense of identity. So his classmates decide that they need to come up with a better plan. So they decide, well, if we can't drive him out of the tree with violence and throwing stones, we need to prove to Pierre that something in this world matters. So they decide to create what they call a heap of meaning. So it's basically this pile of stuff, and they decide they're going to contribute things that are meaningful to them to prove to Pierre that something in this world has meaning. So the way the book is structured, the classmates basically kind of go through the class one by one, each person challenging the next person essentially to give up something that is important to them. And so it starts off, fairly simple. They're asking each other to give up things like a favorite pair of shoes or a favorite set of books. And then it gets, bigger. So they're asking each other to give up a dirt bike. And then it gets more twisted. They dig up the dead baby brother of a student in the class and put the coffin and the corpse on this pile of meaning that they're keeping hidden in this abandoned sawmill. It escalates quickly. They force one of the girls in the class to give up her innocence, so that's something to be aware of in terms of subject matter. It's a very disturbing chapter. It culminates in them cutting off the finger of one classmate who is a guitar player. So the things that they're forcing each other to contribute to this heap of meaning become more and more twisted and unsettling and disturbing as the book goes on. And I think, obviously it brings up a lot of really important questions, a lot of thematic parallels to a book like Lord of the Flies, where you're dealing with questions about human nature and lack of authority, and what people will do given certain circumstances. My problem with the book, I had a couple problems. There's a first-person narrator, Agnes, who's one of the students in the class, and she's so detached that you just know nothing about her, and she has no connection to these horrendous acts that are occurring. And I do think that that could be deliberate on the part of the author. It's not so much about telling Agnes's story as she is more kind of a means for exploring these philosophical questions. But I just felt such a lack of connection to the narrator. I also really felt a lack of connection to the plot. I don't think the story is very well developed. And again, perhaps that's deliberate on the part of the author. Maybe it's not so much about character development and telling an interesting story as it is using kind of the bare bones of this plot as kind of a conduit for exploring these philosophical questions. And I get that, but I, as a reader, just had trouble connecting with the story. There were moments where I was either deeply unsettled or just feeling like the writing and the plot was fairly tedious. So if I was feeling that way, I feel like probably students would feel that way as well. In terms of what you could use this book to teach, like I mentioned earlier, I do not think that this book would be useful in its entirety, but I do think you could perhaps use excerpts of it, maybe through a thematic unit on a book, maybe like Lord of the Flies. If you're doing another unit on kind of human nature, you could use excerpts of this to kind of make those connections between different texts. I think that could be really effective. I think it does perhaps open up some interesting cross-curricular possibilities between English and philosophy. Our school, for instance, has a philosophy elective that students can take primarily in their 11th or 12th grade year, so it could be a cool kind of collaboration between English and philosophy if they're studying these kinds of questions about meaning and purpose in their philosophy course. Or honestly, it could just be used as a supplemental text in a philosophy course. Again, I think excerpts probably would be more effective than using the whole text. In terms of what students this book would appeal to, honestly, I think it would be a fairly small set of students. I think very cerebral, very intellectual students who enjoy discussing these kind of big, abstract questions. These would be very advanced readers, probably students, to be honest, that are typically bored by the types of books that are required in school. Recommending this kind of book might challenge them in a really good way. On the flip side, though, I do think that the subject matter of this book could be very unsettling to a lot of students, and I think for other students, the questions that it's raising are perhaps just too far over their heads. So I think that a select set of students might really enjoy this book and might be challenged by the questions that it raises, but I don't think the vast majority of students would be able to handle some of the subject matter in a book like this. So that's Nothing. Check it out this summer. I'm interested to see if other people read it in different ways, or if people had the same reaction to it that I did. And again, keep it in mind if you have a set of students that are maybe a little bit bored or undermotivated by some of the books that they're reading in school. These are students that really latch on to these kinds of deep philosophical discussions. They might really enjoy a book like this. So up next is Jasper Jones by Craig Silvey. I'm really excited about this one. I just started reading it last night, so hopefully I will have the review video for this one up probably earlier mid next week. So hopefully everyone's having a good week, and I will see you next time. Bye!